Lords of the Fallen's issues are hard to ignore in its current state. I'll say this up front, the performance hang-ups, in particular on Series S right now, at times make the game hard to play. In a break with the usual format of my tech reviews then, let's go straight for the jugular. Let's get to performance testing in the worst case, kicking off with Series S. Using the 60fps performance mode to start, the turnout is at least within expectations during the first few hours of play. But the reality is, 60fps is often too high a target for Series S, and that's despite running at a dynamic 720p resolution, with drops to 432p at lowest. So for example, the tutorial area runs at between 50 to 60 FPS as it guides you through the watery Umbral realm, and then the first dragon boss battle, plus segments of the ruined village area beyond it, stretch this reading down to 40 FPS at lowest. Certainly this 40 to 60 FPS range is hardly ideal, but at least motion stands to improve if you have a VRR supporting display. The real trouble spot for Series S though is the first boss battle against Pieta. Once Pieta starts summoning the swords from the heavens, Series S drops down to the mid-20s, and it's here we see the resolution go to its lowest value of 432p as well, with a form of reconstruction in place. But obviously, with such a low base pixel count to work with, the picture quality in motion is often quite poor, with a struggling frame rate too. This Pieta boss battle is the worst case so far, but it's a surprise Series S actually holds to 60fps at points as well. The bigger issue though is the frame rate hang-ups in the current build. Essentially, it's possible for frame times to drop abruptly, causing a visible hitch mid-combat, and in the extreme rare cases, Series S runs continuously in the single frame rate digits as we move between major areas. Even on the latest update, these hang-ups are still sadly a problem. So here's how it looks right now. After installing the latest patch, I gave my Series S a complete reboot and set up a brand new character. Playing for barely half an hour though, turning this corner gives us a heavy lurch down to 5 FPS for a good stretch. More crucially, the frame time reading on left dips below our graph's already extended 320 millisecond range. In all likelihood, this is a memory contention issue while the next area's assets load in. And fortunately, Series S does eventually settle at its regular frame rate just before we get into the battle here. It puts us back at 50 to 60 FPS where the GPU appears to again be the limit. Admittedly, these hang-ups are less frequent today on Series S compared to its launch day state. Still, it happens often enough to be an issue for playability, and moving quickly between major areas is the most typical trigger. Equally, the longer the play session, the more likely I found it to see hitching occur. It's worth noting that online play is disabled for all testing in the settings menu, ruling out networking issues, and so again, most likely, this relates to an issue with memory management or a CPU bottleneck as assets load in too quickly for Series S to handle. The upside is Hexworks' efforts to optimize the game are still ongoing. With each update, the patch notes do often point out improvements in memory use on console, so at least the game is on the right track. For now though, the lurches in frame rate during traversal are something to be wary of on Series S, as are the mid-20s reading during the Pieta boss battle. Next along is Xbox Series X, and here's some good news at least. In practically every area where Series S drops into the 40s or 30s, Series X pushes a reading much closer to 60 FPS. Whether it's across the village or even the opening to the Pilgrim's Perch area, it fixes at 60 far more consistently. The baseline performance is generally more solid, if not entirely perfect. Eventually, certain spots pull into the 50s and even the 40s, the two classic stress points being the Pieta boss battle and the Skyrest hub. And even later dungeons like Pilgrim's Perch eventually pull us below the line as well. Again, it's the rapid movement, plus adding the complex geometry of the Umbral realm that cues bigger lurches. On average though, the typical reading on Series X trends towards 60 FPS, and in terms of the resolution in performance mode, we're looking at a dynamic 1152p with drops to 648p lowest, which isn't ideal, but still an upgrade on the Series S's noisy reconstructed image. Now potentially, this pixel count does go even higher, and in fact, one sample on Series X does hit 2160 by 1215, looking right at the sky, but this is the most typical range. Sadly, with regards to Series X, there's still a catch. Hitching and performance hangups on Series X are also an issue during combat and quick traversal. It's not as frequent as Series S, and it takes a lot more playtime to reach the same low frame rates in my experience, but when it happens, it's impossible to ignore. This is, again, a brand new character on my Series X test, and for roughly 2 hours of play, there's little issue. The only major interruption up to that point is in turning this corner to the castle, much like Series S, but again the drop isn't as jarring. The biggest issue, in my case anyway, kicked in after warping back to an early checkpoint and running from the opening village to the Skyrest hub. Again, across this courtyard, there's a huge bottleneck that's throttling our performance down to 1 frame per second, sometimes even 0. It's worse than any experience I've had on Series S, though I do suspect it's possible to hit this level on both consoles with enough time. As a quick fix, closing and restarting the app from the Xbox menu cleared this area up completely. Not ideal, obviously, but it's a workaround for now in case you do stumble into these lurches, because otherwise, the frame rate on Series X's performance mode typically rests at 60 FPS with drops into the 40s. Sticking to performance testing, let's see PS5 in action. Both PS5 and Series X are identical in their visual setups, and again we're peaking at 1152p resolution here, with 648p as the lower bounds. Also, the frame rate itself is often a direct match for Series X. Expect to see it at the top 60 FPS line, but there are major areas like the Skyrest hub and the Pilgrim's Perch, which eventually pull us again into the 50s and 40s. Especially so while in the more complex Umbral realm, but on the whole this is very comparable. The upside for PS5, in my experience at least, is that hitching is drastically reduced, certainly next to Series S and X. The most standout frame time spikes are really in traversal and also when switching realms, and they're minimised for Sony's machine. So let's compare all three consoles directly here to get a sense of the frequency of drops. This is a matching run across the world, with each console tested after a fresh reboot. We're playing in the more taxing Umbral realm as well, and it's clear Series S trails the pack here, down to 40 FPS where the premium consoles hit 60 FPS. Unfortunately, on turning this corner up to the castle, it's really the two Xbox machines on left here that have the more visible traversal hitches, the bigger frame time spikes on the left side graph. So based on the first few hours of play at least, it does seem PS5 has an advantage overall when running on the performance mode.